So I am happy to invite the speakers from the second panel and the moderator on stage. We'll be talking about audience engagement, local knowledge, and translation power. And I want to introduce you the moderator, Elisa da Costa, who is the founder of the Young Agency Network that fosters socially impactful projects, a guest lecturer at the Zürcher Hochschule der Künste, and the creator of Plurivoice, an audio intervention at the Museum de Culture in Basel that amplifies public opinions and marginalized voices. And again, I'm very happy that she's also a member of Artistic Advisory Board of Culturescapes 2025 Sahara. Elisa, colleagues, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Hi. Yeah, applause. First of all, I just wanted to say I'm really honored actually to be able to moderate this panel today. I would lie if I would say I'm not scared. There's so much knowledge in the room. So yeah, I hope you all stick to the end because we will need you also to participate in this conversation. Usually when I moderate, I don't really like a passive audience. So today you're also here to work and collab with us. I hope that's fine with everyone. I would also like to now welcome our three guests. With me on stage, I have Adel Abdelwahab, I have Katya García-Antón and Alexandra Portmann with me here on stage. Welcome to the three panelists. Thank you so much. Well, as discussed today, our conversation circles around audience engagement, local knowledge, and translation power. I think those are three buzzwords that somehow we already heard a little bit in the prior conversation. So I'm really lucky that we can just continue there. But before that, I would also love to hear from you three what you experienced in your role, what you can share with us. And yeah, I would say I would love to start with Adel. Adel, you're here, I mean, in general, you when we discussed it beforehand, I was super impressed. I would say you're also a multi-talented person, which is probably not a coincidence. I think many of us in the room have sometimes different roles that we carry. But one thing that we put also a focus on was actually to discuss your experience as the initiator of the festival Theater is a Must. It's a political theater in Alexandria, which already, yeah, I mean, it already raised some questions in my head, right? But probably you can explain to us what Theater is a Must is as a festival, what your role is there, not only as the initiator, but also the curator, and how you understand your audience.
Hello, I'm very happy to be with you. I'm also theater director. I started as a theater director. I work in Alexandria, Egypt. So before I become curator or artistic director for the festival, which is I initiate, in the beginning it was me alone, young guy. It happens that there's a revolution happening and I was part of it somehow, 2011. And in this time I was 27, I think. And I had a question, what it will remains after this momentum of the Arab Spring. This was my main question. And I was, yeah, also my experience wasn't very big. I was just trying to see what is my artistic practice, form it, shape it. And then I had this question about political theater. Before the revolution and before I initiate this festival, I was thinking that political theater is bad, is not high art. It is something like it's propaganda somehow. And then I started, and after what's happening, I got inspired of some pieces. One of them, it was by a friend of mine. We become friends afterwards, Layla Sulaiman. And she had a piece called No Time for Art. And it was about the young people who died during the events. And it was a documentary theater. And this opened my eyes somehow about this momentum thing. And my previous idea about theater, is it when it's a political, and do my previous theater, it was political or not? It was actually political. My first piece also, it was about the main inspiring, it was invading Iraq by USA, 2003. This was the main inspiration for me when I did this piece. It was a piece by Harold Pinter. It's called Mountain Language. So it's so I did before somehow a political theater, but I didn't know what is political theater. It was just me as an artist representing myself or trying to find my voice somehow. Yeah, after a while, yeah, it's a big journey. Like it's since 2012. Next year we will have the 10th edition of the festival. It's an independent festival, mainly contemporary. Then we started to have, after years, we started to do like theme each year. So it's become a thematic. So we put a theme and then we curate based on the theme. I don't know if it's this, yeah, what else? Yes, but something very important that is my connection also to this defining what is political theater. It was the German contemporary theater somehow. So also I started to visit Germany sometimes and then Switzerland, and I saw many contemporary performances that shaped somehow my vision about this, and it's still grow about what is political or contemporary theater. I don't think it's in Egypt or in the region we have something like this. Yeah, we have some kind of festival like this, but also it is very interesting because also our team now is growing, and now we are understanding more and about many things. So part of it, or very important thing about it, is decolonization somehow, or this terminology. It appears most of the time in our curatorial discussions.
Probably just to add to that, when we talk about the audience of the political theater, I mean, obviously what is being observed in general, that the numbers of attendance is somehow declining, and usually the audience is becoming more aging. Is that something that also applies to your festival? Or is it more like, because you said it started also out of the Arabic Spring movement, and so do you have in general a younger audience?
Yes, our audience, it's mainly about young audience. And now young audience, when I started, I was part of the young audience. Now young audience, totally different. And also in theater, if you want young audience in theater in a country like 100 million people and totally attached to internet, attached to the technology. So for them to stay in theater like 2-3 hours is nothing. Like it's not something. The thing is, we're trying to establish somehow and building audience. And after years, yes, we can say yes, we are building audience, and also we built somehow a narrative or a small legacy, so even people who didn't attend, so they know the names, they know what's doing, it's different, it's something different. And what I'm trying to do is to be safe place somehow, safe and controversial, but safe, I mean really safe. I don't want to clash with any government, with any authorities, because it's easy to clash and then you put many things in risk. Before I was more radical, now I am more quiet. So it's a safe environment somehow for audience and for artists. But also to not be censored at all. And this is, we succeed till now to not censor any of our shows that we have in Alexandria. Even we have a systematic censorship for the theater in the country, in Egypt. Like anyone have a public show has to be under the censorship to be approved. But till now, we never submit any text, any play to this censorship thing.
We also had discussed in our prior conversation that obviously because you're not supported by the state, it also creates certain limitation of what is possible to create as a festival. Obviously, I imagine that it's hard also to find funding. And you also you now mentioned that your audience is quite young. As we see right now, right, technology is almost entering every other market. How important is also new technology, new media, linked to your festival? When we think around how to engage with the audience, how to probably also bring new audience members into the space, is that something that is crucial for you, or is it almost a non-digital approach?
You asked two things, or you talk about two things.
I'm
the
sorry.
Limitation of the money and state funding, which is also, I will go back to the previous panel, because that's very important, because the funding and the money is shaping also what we are doing, and also it is the most powerful tool in the power game and the colonization game. It is the money, because if you have the money, I felt a lot of people traumatized from the French institutes around and I don't know why French, like Germans also can be tough, but also I don't know, but it's I didn't deal a lot with French people, with French institute, sorry, in culture. But I have a strategy. When I work, like I worked with Pro Helvetia many times, and 4 times, like I invited Ariana Goch, she's a writer, and because the theme, it was about feminism, so I invited a woman, white woman from Switzerland, and she worked with Egyptian female actresses, and they had a performance, and then they had it in Egypt, and then in Basel, and then after this, the other 3 participation from Switzerland to my festival, no one was white man or something like this. Like Tando Tsili, we invited her twice. She made Face Off, which was amazing, with our young audience also. And that's a performance about racism, and she had a nice game, like not black facing but white facing. She did the reverse. It was very interesting, and also it was interesting to see it with a country. Sometimes people didn't think they don't have any racism, but there is racism for sure. So also it was important for this, in this context. Where is your position? Because also when you talk about racism or decolonization, the position, your position and where you are standing is very important. And this is what we are trying to do. And also we invited another performance for young dancers also last year. It was called Perspectives, 3 black women from Switzerland. It was also about racism. So it's always like this. With the French, I invited Syrian artists. So this is my game to play with money and the power game and all of this, because if you say your society or the French, this is representing the French community or the German community. So in my opinion, the German community is this. So I bring those artists, because also we need to learn from them, and also we discuss with each other also many things. Sometimes we didn't thought about it. Like I had many talks with Tando as example about the racism and the colonization, because sometimes people think Egypt somehow now this is new narrative also. It was part of the colonization somehow. Also this is something some Sudanese artists now say it. So also this talks when someone really like Tando or other young dancers, we talk about this. So also it deconstruct a lot of things in our minds also as curators and artists in this universe, like big country like Egypt. And also it's not, also, it's a country with a big narrative somehow in the continent, not just because the narrative of the ancient Egyptians, but also 60s. There were many relations between Africa and Egypt. It was very dominant in the liberation movements and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Katya, hi. Katya, you obviously also have so much of experience already in the field. And when we talked, right, we mainly also were focusing on your experience within the Nordic Pavilion that also then somehow transformed to the Sami Pavilion, right? Maybe you can share with us a little bit how you end up to be responsible for the Nordic Pavilion, what you experienced, and also how the understanding within the organization changed, not only linked to its audience, but also in the understanding who belongs to the space, who should be seen, who shouldn't be seen, and so on.
Thank you, and thank you also for including me in this discussion. And I think there's a lot of intersectional possibilities here, which I think is one of the reasons why I'm possibly standing or sitting here today. But I want to start out by saying that in the Nordic region, despite the appearance that it might give to the world as an area of democracy and equality and common social wellness, there is a deeply entrenched coloniality apparatus, which is present today, and which has grown over hundreds of years of entrenched colonialism, and against particularly the Sami indigenous people, but also with other parts of the world, like the Caribbean. And that this ongoing coloniality today actually also has some resonance here in Switzerland, which is a point which I think is important because not everybody is aware of that. But, for example, companies like the bank that was called Credit Suisse before, that was taken over by UBS, they are around 40% owners of one of Norway's biggest windmill park in a place called Fossen. A windmill park that provides incredible amount of energy, which is being sold across Europe, not just to Switzerland. A windmill park which was built illegally on Sami grounds. The Samis took the Norwegian government to court, and they won in the Supreme Court. And despite that, The windmill park is still functioning. It is destroying Sami ancestral sacred lands. It is destroying livelihoods, and it's destroying communities. So this is what I mean by intersectionality and interconnectivity, and how these coloniality apparatuses in the Nordic region are deeply interconnected beyond its frontiers, and in this particular case, deeply interconnected to Switzerland. But the other thing to say, and I'm giving you a lot of context here so that I can then get to the point, so excuse me for a second, is that there are 3 processes in the Nordic region to do with truth and reconciliation. One of them is just finished in Norway. There's another one in Sweden, another one coming up in Finland. And these processes are deeply flawed. The one in Norway has failed completely in many different ways. Very little is happening. So in those kind of situations, you ask yourself very deeply, when you have an opportunity, when you are given the opportunity because you have funding, you have a structure, like I was directing a foundation, Office of Contemporary Arts, you have a team, you have a whole series of resources and privileges, your responsibility to ask yourself, what are you going to do with that? And to what aim, for whom, and how are you going to make it resilient? How are you going to make it long-term, beyond the event? Those are deep questions that come a little bit to answer what you asked me. So I became director of the Office of Contemporary Arts in 2014, and this was my first time in the Nordic region. I'm half British, half Spanish. I've worked in Switzerland for 11 years. But I came to Norway with the same understanding that maybe a lot of you also share, and was deeply surprised and deeply shocked when I asked some of my Norwegian colleagues in the early months, so, how do you collaborate with indigenous colleagues, with the Sami communities, and received incredibly stereotypical answers. Oh, no. That's, their practices are stuck in the past. They're not relevant today. They're not contemporary. And by the way, you should watch yourself because they're very complicated people. You end up in trouble, and they're drunk half the time. So these are responses given to me by very professional colleagues, and it was, I suppose, a very a big alarm bell that went off in my head, and I thought here is perhaps the site in which I can direct a lot of the energies of the foundation. And one of the things that the foundation was in charge of was the Nordic Pavilion in the Venice Biennale, which is, of course, a tremendous platform for visibility, for impact. Already in 2014, I was in charge of deciding on what the project was going to be, of commissioning the project and curating it for 2015. And already then, I was saying to myself, well, connecting with Sápmi. Sápmi is the name of the indigenous nation community, which is traversed by Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. Would be a way, would be something important. But I also realized that we in our organization did not have the knowledge, did not have the trust, did not have the relationships. And not only that, the Nordic region wasn't prepared for that yet. We hadn't created sufficient conversation. And also globally, there wasn't perhaps much of an awareness that there was even an indigenous community in the Nordic region, white-skinned. So that's where this journey began. It was a journey that took around 7 years. And I think this is an important point because very often when we talk about decolonial practices, we talk about short things. Maybe it's a discussion, maybe it's an exhibition. But actually one thing which is really important that has come across all of these discussions today is that it's a long-term, ongoing, perhaps never to be achieved commitment. Not the only thing that can be done, because there can be many other things that can be done in parallel. And also I wanted to, when talking about decolonial, since it's been critiqued in some ways, very justly so, I wanted to also say something about that, because we discussed this too. Yes. Because it's about labor. Mm-hmm. Whose job is it to do what? And I think from a European white person's perspective, I find myself in the position of having that job to do and not wanting to pass on that ball to those who have experienced it, whether historically or in the present. So I believe the colonial burden is a burden that I will be part of, probably for the rest of my career. But for the Sami perspective, their task, from what I hear from them, is not decolonization, but it's Samification, indigenization. So, to get to the Sami Pavilion, it took around 7 years. In those 7 years, the goal was very much not just to build enough resources to be able to really address this project in a fundamental, deep way, but also to build up the relationships of trust with a community that is divided by 4 nation-states. You can imagine logistically how complicated that was. To work closely with the 3 Sami parliaments across 3 different nations, build the relationships with them, to also change the approaches of ministries of culture and ministries of defense, to prepare the international ground so that when we arrived with this project, it would reverberate as much as possible, and also to consider, with that money that we had built up in those 7 years to be able to get to this point, how would we make sure that it wasn't just a one-off project, that actually this would lead, ricochet to other things for all of the participants involved. So we ended up with around 100 participants working across generations, working with elders, working with youth, in a whole series of collaborative systems that brought in Sami peers at the very heart of the decision-making and the implementation of the project. And without talking much more about it, it was a proposal for a methodology of how to create some long-lasting, resilient, transformative possibilities.
Thank you so much. We will get back to all those important topics that you already raised, and I would like to give the floor to Alexandra. I saw you nodding also to a lot that was already said, and I think we also discussed several of those dimensions that were already raised. Alexandra, as an assistant professor of theater studies, you have a deep understanding, or you started to create a deep understanding of the landscape within Switzerland. Besides that, you also did several projects within Switzerland. You also worked with or for the Stadttheater. And before, when we talked beforehand, the question about who we considered to be an audience, especially in the Swiss context, you actually had a really interesting point about who we see as an audience and who not, and probably how that has to change before we can talk about audience engagement. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about that.
Thank you very much. It's working? Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you very much for this question, and also thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. Well, talking about audiences and talking about the question, who is the audience, I think that's a crucial point to ask. And kind of this question came out of my current research, which was about the institutionalization of the so-called independent theater scene here in Switzerland, which evolved in the 1980s and kind of professionalized through the decades and established new funding systems. And so basically kind of the question of how, and so actually what is very much interesting, I'm making here a little bit of a kind of journey, but kind of why starting with this question of the institutionalization of the independent theater scene. One crucial claim was to open up the institutions to different artistic practices, but also to different audiences. And so there was a very, very strong claim to open up the institution in order to have a legitimation strategy in order to get funding. So what I have shown through my research is that kind of this question of what does it mean to open up an institution changed a lot. And what really was striking for me going back to the archives is that in the 1980s, when kind of this institutionalization and professionalization processes started, the engagement with a local, diverse audience, so working with the local diversity of a place in Switzerland, which is deeply shaped by migration, by guest workers regime here in Switzerland, and all of these different communities already living in the city was much stronger than it actually evolved over the decades. So basically now we are here again in a question how to open up the institutions and kind of this, to take this kind of local diversity as a starting point to think is one of the crucial questions when we talk about institutionalization. So that was kind of a little bit of my research. So when we are talking about audiences, we have to consider the local diversity, and then we realize that how actually Switzerland is deeply shaped by migration and by all of these different aspects, and how actually little of this kind of local diversity is actually reflected on stages and within institutions. And so basically that's kind of, yeah, I don't know if, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think that would also raise another question that I would like now for all of you three to answer. Obviously, decolonizing festivals concerning the audience probably also means first changing the understanding of who we consider to be an audience, and then probably also changing our understanding of what a festival is, what the spaces are. So what are your experiences towards that? And probably I have to elaborate what I mean, right? For example, we are here right now, really classical setting of how we would do panels. We are on a stage, the audience is down there. Would it mean to decolonize festival to already change how we are sitting in this room and how we exchange with the audience? Whoever wants to ask the question, take the question first.
Actually, I was in Hamburg in August, and there was a performance. It was the summer festival of Camp Nagel. And it was a performance in Hamburg Museum. And the performance was a dance performance, and all this expensive European art, fantastic. And for me, it was, wow, what is this art? And the performance was a bit not interesting for all of the people, but also it was dance performance, 3 performers like removing their clothes, wearing clothes, doing this, and moving around. And the people from the museum, like the keeper of the painting, they are watching the audience, so no one touch anything. And actually, it was a chaos because also it wasn't ordinary theater. Somehow, you don't have any perspective. So I was also in a good mood, so I started to clown somehow, to move and to talk with my friends. And then there is a guy, very decent, older than me, like 10 years, or like had more white, more than me, and tell me, this is a performance, and you can't do this like this, and start lecturing me about performance. And then I started to lecture him about what is performance, and this is interactive performance, and they can't talk with me like this, and all of this. And I had this idea since 2017. If African or Arab artists want to disrupt the narrative of White Cube Museum with a performance, so he go and through painting, what will happen? He will be a terrorist and he will go to the prison. And then this happened after with the movement of the environment movement when they went to the Louvre, and they did. But most of them also coming from white activism. Most of them coming from white activism. Even they are considered terrorists now in Germany, as also other stuff. But also this thing, when you see how also how evolving the society, it's amazing. Like it's also you can take the same situation with with 2 different persons, and this is what we have to decolonize. If African did it, he will be not a good African. If he climb and save a baby from, he will be a good African. So the good African, he climbed to to save a baby who will he's in a flat full of fire or something like this. And the white, the good European stand against petroleum and against Shell and against all this company. Yes, he is good. So now also the white activism teaching us and imposing stuff on us in Gaza and in many things. So it's now this is the thing is it's a chaos, and we need to reshape. That's what I feel. So discussing these questions deeply, it is what will lead us to find somehow solutions, like solutions in our context. To find a solution, so we need resilience, how we will be resilient. So if we talk about decolonization, so we think about our audience who are coming to our theater when the ticket is 50 CHF, 50 euro or something like this. Who will come? Who will attend? It's not even enough if you do a programs with reduced tickets or some programs outside, or it's not enough if you want people really engage and dismantle all this hierarchy and all this thing. You have to think about the market, how it's work. It work very bad. And here in Switzerland, like it's the money coming from many places, and also at the end, it sustains the same thing, like the capitalism thing, from private companies to the state theater to. So it's a bit, we have to think, not now, not tomorrow, but we have to think about this, what we actually need from this, and how to make a breakthrough. And also something else, when Katya talking about Sami people, it's very important thing about decolonization is tokenism also. Like also Sami people, the first time I knew about Sami people when I was in Sweden, I think, I knew that it's also they are exhausted from touring to show that their culture is part of this European. So this is tokenism also. And it happens also with the Arab Spring, and it happens also with Palestinian artists, and it happens with many people. And this is not good. And also on the other side, there is something else, the representation. The representation of Arab, like now, the representation of Ukrainian artists is important. The representation of Palestinian artists is important. This is something also we have to think about it. Like as example, in Germany, in the summer festival this year, not only one Arab artist in the whole summer festivals of Germany, which is a lot. No one. Because of what? Because they are afraid of someone like break or so, yeah. And I understand some fears, and I said, but you need to talk. You don't need to ban and to cancel. This is the thing. And something in the previous panel was interesting when you talk about accountability and corruption and. Yeah, and always European and Western think about accountability when they give money for the culture. And when they give money to the terrorists or to the freedom fighters in Afghanistan, they don't ask for receipts or anything. Like when they give to El Gulani, as example, to Konkora, yes, he is for sure Al-Assad is a dictator, but when you give it to the money to ex-Qaeda, ex-ISIS, ex-Bin Laden, no, you don't have a receipt. Yeah, here goes.
Thank you. Katya, Alexandra, what is your take on this?
Talking about exhaustion, I think that's something to mention. You know, there's around 120,000 Sami people living over an area divided by 4 nation states, each one with different regulations, all of them with a very strong apparatus of coloniality. This idea of constantly having to be out there, constantly having to take your case forward, often involved in 5, 6, 7 struggles, some of them legal cases in tribunals, traveling very long distances. Exhaustion is also a tool of coloniality. It's not by accident that exhaustion takes place. It is part of the system. Just as what I call the politics of distraction is also part of the system, to create structures and processes which are so everlasting and long-going that not only are you mentally so occupied with that you can't put your energies into something else. So when you think about understanding audiences and who are your audiences, and when thinking about the particular case of the historic transformation of the Nordic pavilion into the Sami pavilion and what that meant, it was also a re-questioning of who those audiences were going to be. So, we did not start out by thinking we've got to make it big in Venice. We want 500,000 people to come through our doors. It was more the other way around. How do we make this relevant for Sápmi? How do we make it relevant for our Sami colleagues? How do we involve and pay as many as possible of our Sami colleagues so that this also works for them? How do we make sure that the Nordic realm in which they exist and in which they will come back to after this pavilion project is more open to receive it and to receive the transformative proposals that it's making? How do we put some of the budget into that too? And how do we then create enough of sort of international interest and awareness so that it generates many more things for our Sami colleagues internationally? Because that's one of the things that seems to work, at least in the Nordic region. If you're able to create interest internationally, that often creates so much more pressure nationally than if you are demanding something nationally. So the strategy to make it in as many international platforms in the arts is a way to put pressure for transformation nationally. So the other thing is that when thinking about your audiences, like when we were thinking about our Sami colleagues, how do we make sure we have enough finances so they can come with their families? Because that is another question. What happens to your families, and how do you handle these long absences? And for our artists, part of the project was that they could choose elders to support them through the process. Because going to Venice is a massive pressure, as in many of these big festivals. So these are all processes of care and support in the process, during the process, and then creating an aftermath situation that would have the maximum possibility of ongoingness.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Alexandra.
Well, I think when we think about your question about kind of decolonizing kind of structures, ways of working, and so on, I think that's a crucial question, how actually this is possible. And that's why I think to fix and to just focus on artistic position, on audiences is not enough. It's basically, it's always kind of this question of how actually the question of audience is also linked to artistic practices. Who is doing this within an institution? Who is working for this institution? How is the constitution of the team? What kind of topic is engaged on stage? So it's kind of this kind of bouquet of different aspects which make, in a way, or which might provoke to think how to produce differently. Because when we talk about decolonization, and now basically in a Swiss context, which I'm talking here, it's also kind of how actually to provide space within an institution to produce differently. And so basically it's not the question of just the audiences and the engagement, but it's also kind of the question of production. And I'm also talking about, not as a scholar, but also as a dramaturg who worked on different kind of intercultural kind of projects. And so between mainly former Yugoslav countries and Switzerland. I mean, kind of having this clash of different production systems, how actually an institution can navigate these different production systems, that's kind of the crucial question of how actually when we're talking about institutions, or even if we link kind of institutions and decolonizing institutions, I think we need to think about working methods first. In relation, and that links it to audiences, to artists, to themes, to the institution and the people who are working in this institution.
So what I hear actually also is that we have to shift our more capitalist understanding, right, within the festival towards more of a social impact-driven understanding. Probably what are the strategies that you use, Adel, actually to achieve that? Because we discussed it as a political theater in Alexandria. You still are also kind of in a codependency of European funds to be able to actually continuously create this space of really like critical political theater within your country. But then how to overcome, right, this codependency? It almost seems like we're still in this loophole, and then what are the strategies you drive to say, okay, that's how I can actually decolonize and create social impact? How much of it is also a little bit, not, I wouldn't say corrupting yourself, but compromising on certain social values? How do you manage to dance in between?
You think I'm corrupted?
No, I would say compromise, right?
Or having someone helping me. Actually, it's because it was a passion in the beginning. It's like I'm making a play, so it was something like this. So at the time when there were a lot of funding for any political act, I tried to ask for funding for this festival and didn't find in 2012. So I made it from my money. It was very simple, and with the support of all the artists around, it happened like this. So it keeps like this. Like I develop I develop my practices, and also somehow the community developed. Like if you are surviving, and there is a need for you, so you find your place. And you are doing this because you think there is a need and necessity. And it's started like this, like theater is a must. And what the fuck, what is theater is a must? No, eating is a must. Anything else is a must. It's not theater is a must. Why you are saying this? But at the end, yeah, it happened like this. And then you develop your practice. But actually, I'm thinking about decolonization, mainly not at my festival. I'm thinking how to create network or to link with people really think about decolonization in other places. Because I started some practices like the only funding I have from, as I said before, for Helvetia also I did it with the Dutch embassy. I invited a Kenyan artist. So this is a strategy I did, not because I challenged them. I will not choose a white artist or a white man or something like this because it's Eurocentric or the white supremacy. Because I created the curation and the theme based on real vital issues in the society. And they are convinced if this curation not based on real research. So when I invited Ogoto Muraya, he's a storyteller from Kenya, and through the Dutch embassy, it was because the edition named Crossing Over, and it was about decolonization. And he made a fantastic show, and I saw it also in Europe. So also, I'm trying to somehow to transfer the knowledge from these people working in Europe and then also in Africa and in different contexts to young artists in Alexandria. And this is the main thing for me. It's not, sometime recently I had a discussion with other curators, and we were talking about, you should put your curation theme or proposal or paper publicly? I said yes. Even some audiences, they don't relate and they don't think, but they like the performance. But I make it as a documentation, and I make it also for some people will find a link between all these performances. Because also to have a festival based on a theme or a curated in Egypt, it's very few, like just DCAF and our festival and few festivals. Maybe now after 9 years, I'm in a position, I'm privileged somehow, so I can talk, and I talk about my curation and all this, and maybe, but what I know and what I'm sure of, I know my privileges somehow, and I'm trying to maneuver this, and unless you know what you achieved and also your privileges, you will develop your practices, so you will not forget the main purpose. So you will always develop yourself. I want to say something very, very important also about institutionalization, because also this is important to us to grow. Like at the end, we have to grow and we have to follow the European system somehow. But we have to make a breakthrough. We don't have to complain at the end, but also it is important also how politics now, like when I see Egypt now and the audience, if we go back to the audience, now Egypt full of many population from many places, like Syrian, it was a few years ago, now Sudanese, now other people, and now Egypt, we thought it's somehow racist and they don't accept, but the society itself accepts and people live, and this is also when you talked about the labor and how the society is moving when there is diversity and people. This is what can make also the theater diverse. But it takes time. We can't say it's happening now. But when you closed, but I can't make it like it's easy to make a proposal. Yes, I want to make a hub for Sudanese refugees. Yes, it will in the first year it will not make anything. Maybe after 3 years it will make something. Even if they left or it's solved or something, because it is something important. It's about how diverse this society and how accepting. But also the society is, I think, it's going faster than us in the theater, and this is for sure. And also for Europe, also it's going faster, the wrong direction, unfortunately.
Alexandra, you're nodding again. What are your thoughts about that?
No, I like very much the expression that the society is going faster than the theater and than the institutions, because I think that's a crucial point. I mean, I think kind of, yes, I was very much thinking about institutionalization, and in a way how theater is institutionalized and how actually this institution appear is also a reflection of how actually how do we understand art, what do we consider to be understood as art, and how actually this understanding of art is in a way also a reflection of how actually we perceive, let's say, society, and at least kind of it's kind of this kind of very, very simple kind of relationship which is built kind of on kind of all of these Enlightenment kind of traditions and so on, and also how actually the theater system in Switzerland is built. It's basically it's an idea out of Enlightenment to have this city theater and this kind of bourgeois understanding of what a society is. And so basically, and I think what is striking me is that kind of these institutions are still so much stuck into this idea. But I think the society is so much further, and there are so much further artistic practices which are present, which are visible, which are in different places. Maybe they don't have the funding which they need to have because they are not considered as professional or as enough professional or whatever, but nevertheless, kind of how actually to make this kind of different practices visible within the institutions which are existing and very much funded, at least in Switzerland. That's kind of something which is a very big and important question. And so basically it's along theater and theater institutions, we in a way negotiate how open we do want to understand our society, basically. And so that's kind of, yeah, I don't know.
So what I also hear is that basically as institutions are moving too slow for society, right? It seems that we see all these like changes in society, all these like geopolitical issues coming in shorter and shorter distances. We observed that in the last few years, but now the institution, it seems, they cannot adapt as fast because some of them are also older institutions. And then it brings me back to that question of exhaustion, right? Who is doing what for who? And then if we think about the institutions that actually are somehow still thrivers within the art scenery, that have a power position, that should move, are probably not moving fast enough. Would you co-sign on that? How would you describe the institutional exhaustion, and what are probably strategies to accelerate the process?
Well, I think, you were asking earlier about how do we change our understanding of audiences, and the formatting of institutions is very much to blame for that. I think, unfortunately, we seem to be incredibly uncreative when it comes to how we structure institutions, and we seem to persist with institutional models that have been in position for decades and decades and decades, which goes back to your question earlier. You were saying, what are we doing? We're sitting here on this platform. You are sitting down there. I mean, from a Sami perspective, from an indigenous perspective, conversations don't happen like this. You would not have a platform. You would sit in a gathering in a circle. You would change the dynamics of it straight away, and there would not be speakers and listeners. There would be just a lot of co-speakers, everybody speaking together. And that changes everything straight away. It changes your understanding, like there isn't an audience. It's a group of colleagues and co-creators. It's a community. Mm-hmm. So you no longer accept this imposition of audiences. You go towards community building, connection building, mutual care, a whole series of things which are difficult to develop when, for example, as an institution receiving funding, you have to do a certain amount of reporting, and in that reporting you are asked quantitative questions rather than qualitative questions. So you are asked, how many people came to your talk? You're not asked, what was the impact of your talk? How did you connect to each other? How did you establish connection? So, yes, I think structure is at the root, absolutely at the root of the challenges that we face.
Thank you, and I think that's the perfect point now to move to the second part, because we actually prepare a question for you guys. So Mia will now come actually into the audience to open the floor, to share with you so you can share with us, and to also, just change the structure a bit. So I would say, Adel, you can ask your question first, and I will then just walk through whoever wants to share. And if no one shares, I'm just going to start picking people.
And maybe we can change where we sit.
Yes. No? Or maybe we also just go into the audience. Yeah?
Well, you can sing.
Changing power dynamics. Yes, please, feel free.
You can sit in the center.
Yeah, that's great.
No, I always have power. I'm an Egyptian Muslim man, very big with beard. So I have privileges and I have powers sometimes. Like it's protecting me actually in the street sometimes, and sometimes it causes problems in Europe.
Do you want to ask the first question, or should I pass to the colleagues? Katya, Alexandra?
Well, I had a question. I was curious if anybody wants to share an experience of a model of, of a structure or an event that really worked for you as an inspirational model, as a transformative model, something that you could share with us.
Hi, I used your model by having a discussion with colleagues in what was called Arctic Voices, where we had 3 different indigenous artists sharing their experience in a circle. And it worked really well. It worked really, really well. But it was also the inclusion of local people with their local experiences, because of the decolonization and the persecution of the indigenous peoples that also happened here in Europe, and not only in Switzerland, but in different countries. So it's using that inclusion to create a solidarity among not only the artists participating, but with the audience as well, because it's very educational for them. And then also using different terminology, like you were suggesting, is indigenizing, not talking about artifacts, but belongings, and changing the terminology, so you're changing the perspective of the Western people, and just about the art, where you take away that Western perspective of the art by showing people that there are other ways of looking at art. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Other voices? Did I see a hand there? Because I said, I will just start picking people. Okay, a familiar face over here.
Yeah. What is the question? If I have seen a model that has inspired me.
In the sense of decolonizing festivals concerning audience. Do you have?
I have maybe one.
Huh? Okay.
I will give it back.
Yeah, no.
No, I wanted to add, because I was also involved in this Arctic Voices project, which was quite kind of a bottom-up project last year in Bern. For 1 month, we had a lot of different kind of events, and what I think worked well also as a strategy was that we mobilized kind of like different groups to participate, also local groups, for example, like the climate strike movement. So they had different kind of networks, which kind of attracted different kind of people to participate, both as artists and activists coming from, mostly from Sapmi, but also it also diversified kind of the audiences, brought young audiences in, I think simply by going through different networks. So I think pluralizations of, like, not only focused on maybe higher art networks, but like also more grassroots networks or public networks kind of worked well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. A third voice in the room? Yes. Thank you so much.
It would be an experience from a different context, but the experience of when the cultural institution, in a way, is in sync with the society, because I think that's a part of a question that we're discussing now, right? That the society moves, there's a certain kind of societal dynamic, the artistic practices and institutions are so formalized that they stay behind. And my example and my sort of experience is what happened with museums in Ukraine after the beginning of full-scale invasion. So you have imminent danger, you have daily attacks, all your artifacts are being stored and mainly evacuated. What happens with you as a museum, as an institution, where basically you cannot possibly fulfill your mission, at least in the understanding of a mission, kind of which used to be before the full scale. You know, your repository of artifacts and kind of cultural heritage and research and scientific facility that also kind of connects with the public. What do you do when nothing of that is there? And it was an interesting transformation then within a scope of, I think, a few months. Museums started to become something between community centers, discussion spaces, kind of hospitality platforms. And you know, within that process, kind of slowly they started to incorporate kind of time-based contemporary art practices, which usually don't come to a classical museum. So something where you have to deal with the artist dealing with the situation nowadays, whether performing arts or visual arts, but again, in the space of a museum, and where community can come and sort of live through the moment, through the experiences that you are kind of being immersed nowadays without kind of, you didn't choose it, it just happens to you. But the need to grasp those experiences, to sort of deal with them, to somehow understand them and live with them, can happen within a museum, which all of a sudden becomes kind of a temporary home for you. And I think this is something which is quite amazing, although again, it would be better if it didn't happen. But if we think about this link between kind of a society situation which is happening, kind of the global situation also, and an institution, I think this is also the connection and the speed and also the ability to step out of any kind of expected framework or any kind of way of thinking of museum, for example, which maybe can also be to a certain extent used not necessarily when you have a war happening, but when just the need of a connection between the cultural institution and society is the priority, and everything else, kind of solutions and ideas and formats can follow.
Thank you so much for sharing. I see other hands. That's great, actually. That's what I wanted. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I had to actually think about, and I had a really good experience working with Sandro in the Caserne. We organized Dia de los Muertos. I'm Mexican, by the way. And I was at that time working with a collective of Mexican artists, and the Caserne wanted to organize, or we somehow organized a party / little festival on the Day of the Dead. And for me, working with them I had a really good experience because we've seen that in many places the way that the Day of the Death is sort of sold or portrayed is something like similar to a Halloween, but in Mexico we have it's also become like a more global event, and it's not that how we as Mexicans experience the Dia de los Muertos, certainly not. So we also love Halloween and we celebrate also Halloween, but for us we have like a clear distinction between those two, and we did an altar in the way that we built the altars to the death in Mexico here in the Caserne. And we actually dedicated this altar to Mani Matter, who is a musician a singer-songwriter from Switzerland, who we felt a lot of resonance because there's many political singer-songwriters in Latin America that have a very similar sort of tone to their music. And the fact that we were able to work like that established this kind of like dialogue that was like at the same eye level. And for me, that was like an experience that I can say like, hey, not so far away. Here in the Caserne, things like that happen. And thank you, Sandra.
Thank you. Some other? Yes, please.
Thank you. Hi, San Bonani. It's just polite in my culture to do that. I'm from South Africa and I'm part of the Culturescapes team. But the example that I have was at the National Arts Festival last year. A journalist and a very good friend of mine who's been working with the Maricana communities, and I don't know how much everybody knows about that, but you can look it up, is a mining town community that was basically slaughtered by our police, and it was sanctioned by our government. And he's been doing what he calls long-form journalism because the story is not over. But he started looking into the history of not only colonialism but apartheid and what that means for various communities. And at the National Arts Festival, he did a very beautiful kind of ceremonial discussion with the communities from Marikana, but also the communities from the Eastern Cape. And what Elisa is talking about this format of sitting in this kind of, there's a stage and there's an audience, is in African culture, you would never discuss anything in this way. So he took it into a kraal, which is where you would generally keep your cows. Everybody sat in a circle, and he had a sangoma come in, which is a traditional healer, for lack of a better word. And the sangoma kind of opened up the ceremony, and there was a very traditional kind of way of engaging in conversations, because despite it not being what we would call formal, and I love that Sahad mentioned that, is that there's different ways of organizing, and just because they're not accepted here doesn't mean that they are not some kind of structures, where he allowed the elders, and it wasn't necessarily just the African elders, but the eldest person in the room happened to be a white man, so he got to speak first and then passed it on to everybody. And I thought a very great format, because everybody then felt like that they were part of the community. And the series of discussions around decolonization, I did a conversation at my festival in Durban in August. And we did a similar thing where I invited people to not be experts, but to be people who maybe provoke the conversation. And the format was that everybody sat in a circle, and what came out of it is that everybody felt that they were part of, and they felt accountable and responsible to engage in this conversation. We kind of also flipped the idea of decolonizing festivals, but also rather embraced the fact that as Africans, we have been festivaling, and I think it was Sahad again who mentioned that maybe we need to change the name. And those kinds of things came up naturally because people started to acknowledge that what they were doing, not in the European structural kind of way, was something that was part of their lives, and maybe perhaps this is a different way of thinking about things. So I think to embrace that kind of indigenization, rather than look at it as the other, but maybe as a different way of learning, was really inspiring to me.
Thank you so much for sharing. I would love now to give the word back to Adel, that has the second and last question for all of us. And then you guys, once again, join the conversation. Thank you.
It's a question about, do we have to make an interpretation, like do you think African or Middle Eastern or African, because it's sub-Saharan now, do we have to make an interpretation for their work, artistic work, like for the audience? Because I started to hear this recently, to interpret, to make a translation, not translation like translation, but to make a link for the audience to understand the context. Because I started to hear it now, especially with what's happening with the genocide, also in some contexts. Like people think, but this will not understand these symbols, will not understand this thing. If you are a curator, do you think about this? Your audience will relate or not? Or do you think about this?
Thank you for the question.
Yes. Definitely necessary, in my opinion, and through an artist statement. You know, curating is also being a translator. But you have to listen first, and you have to listen and then recheck your translation with the artist again, or with the person who wants to explain.
Not just a translation. I mean not translate, but I mean to explain a context.
Most definitely, because the context would not be, I would say, not be familiar to me. I'd have to have that explanation so I can maybe be in that area where the artwork was being made, so that I could understand. But then the other part is with the translation, so that one can maybe find that connection to where that person is, like here in Switzerland. If you're talking about the Arctic, you can talk about the Alpine region here, because it is also a tundra region. So it's like finding that link, so that people can connect a little bit better with where the artist is coming from. Do you understand what I mean? Ah, great.
Thank you for sharing. Any other? Yes.
There are two ways to go about it. I'm talking from my personal experience as a curator, having done projects on the African continent and also in other parts of the world. One example, the best live art artwork I saw in my experience is by a South African artist. And it was like walking through the city of Cape Town. And it was like you're doing the 12 stations of the cross. The audience is involved. We had a booklet, and it was like a call and response at sunset. So we had candles. I was very, very drawn into it. Also aware that I was missing some kind of, I'm trying to find a word in English, the cultural context, what is behind, the codes, cultural codes. And I could see when we were walking how the audience was growing, because there's people passing by were following. So this sense of communion, that's what interested me. And some of the codes I could understand. And so the next day I spent time with the artist, with the curator, to know what I have missed and to understand it better. It's an amazing performance, but it's so site-specific, you can't export it. And even if you try to export it, if you are not aware of the history of South Africa, the history of Cape Town, and all the subtle layers of that history, you can't explain all of that. So sometimes it's what Elisa will say, the right to opacity, which I accepted very humbly, but knowing that I know South African history, so at least I wasn't lost. On other cases, when you give too much information, it kills this kind of emotion you can have. I used to tell to students, if I have to read 3 pages or have a PhD in art history to understand this artwork, then maybe it's not a good artwork. But on the other side, when you are curating African artists abroad, or when you bring, let's say, non-African artists, let's say, to the Dakar Biennial, you also have to remember who is your audience. So what kind of brief can you give? Background information, like a kind of pitch when you do a studio visit and ask the artist, what is your work about? So just give those as a key, and then let the audience connect or decide not to connect. You know, sometimes I can see work and say, I don't understand it, it's not for me. I will not dare saying this is bad art. So I think you have to give, and in theater it's even more important. I saw also a very great performance by a Belgian-Moroccan artist in Cape Town. It was translated. People were very happy. It was very ironical, even cynical. So the audience was responded. But I was the one screaming and jumping because I know the colonial history and the relationship between Morocco, France, and Belgium. But the audience also enjoyed it. So it's how do you make this balance? But if you have to lecture people before they enjoy it, then they're going to miss that magical part, I guess.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. So I just want to thank all of you for participating, for listening, to sticking with us. Also, once again, a great applause to my 3 panelists. It was great. Thank you. And then I think just from my side, thank you so much to Culturescapes also to make this possible, to give me the space, and also to try something new out in this room. So thank you so much.
Round of applause to Elisa.